Hey Bill, how's it going?
Morning, how you doing? Or like, it's morning my time. It's afternoon your time, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it is. Yeah, it's afternoon here, but yeah, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us on the Architect Tomorrow series.
Excited. This is fun.
Good stuff. So look, I know it's we've kind of met each other through the Consultant Saying Things series that Chris runs, which has been interesting to sort of discuss a bunch of things there. But you and I kind of touched on a number of more techie kind of architecture type themes that I thought would be good to kind of get our conversation. So I'm really pleased we've found some time. But Bill, before we go any further, give us a bit of background on you.
Yeah, so I reluctantly got back into industry about 6 months ago. I almost say reluctant because now with Red Hat. Red Hat's actually a really cool company. I'm on their public sector, North American public sector side, and I'm
Okay.
running a team that's building out their trusted software supply chain and software factory, software supply chain management concepts. So work with Red Hat. I want to push us up to being, one of the top thought leaders in that area around what software supply chain is. And I've got some own thoughts myself where I think that's where you're going to see not just DevOps, but the concept of managing software becoming more, I don't say business-like because that's not the word, but more enterprisey. I
Right.
would almost say that things like what we've been doing with the trusted software supply chain would become more ERP and ERP type systems
Okay.
for software. They'll be analogous to that. So that's what I'm doing right now is they play product owner, managing architect over there, and everything from I call like its own little internal startup. Everything we build the concepts, the products, the services, and bring them out to market. So
Okay.
that's what I'm doing right now.
Okay. Well, I'll probably pick your brains a little bit more on that later on. But tell me a bit more about your story about how you got into tech. So interesting to hear about your current role at Red Hat. But how did you talk us a little bit about your journey into technology and architecture?
So it was high school.
Okay.
And the first router was a Linksys router on the block. There's no routers at that time. So I remember the old Linksys routers. Even had the big card I had to stick in the side of my, I think it was a Toshiba PC, right?
Okay.
That thing should be in an artifact in a museum somewhere. But yes, I mean, started out with Notepad and writing PHP and MySQL. It was my junior year of high school. There was an HTML class, took this HTML class, liked this HTML thing. And before that, I had written some VB scripts. So I taught myself, it was that SAMS Teach Yourself Visual Basic in 9 hour type thing. It was 98 actually, because it was on my Packard Bell. I remember it
Okay.
was on my Packard
Okay.
Bell. So like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm saying something. If people would be listening to this, like, oh, I remember the times like they talked something from the 60s and 70s. Yeah, I definitely don't go back. Don't go back there. Yeah, so my foray into tech was around that. Went to school for business, but after I got out, and even did some small little tech projects in college. After I got out, I started inside of a North American is a large aerospace defense company,
Okay.
and I was buying stuff from the UK. So I was supporting the Aviate Harriers,
Okay.
and was at Bournemouth, and a couple other folks out
All
of
right.
Bournemouth.
Okay.
So I was doing a lot of the international procurement for parts for the Aviate Harrier. So,
How funny. So yeah, I know Bournemouth well. It's actually where my wife's from. So
oh really?
small world. Small world.
There we go. As I was buying out of some of our suppliers out there, Honeywell historically had purchased them, so it's like Honeywell, but they were still the UK suppliers. So still made some of the stuff for the Harrier that nobody else made.
Okay.
But yeah, so as I was going through there, you have a $2.5 billion division of Boeing that was basically well, we've got an international crowd. The United States, the AutoZone. I'm trying to think it would be over like in the UK and Western Europe, like where you go get car parts, like your little retail car part thing.
Oh, like Halfords probably. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so something like that, but it's for fighter aircraft, and
Okay.
but it's still run on spreadsheets. And you're also dealing with U.S. government regulations. I'm procuring on behalf of the government, so I have to represent the government and spending the best of money, which means every time I buy something, generally, no matter how much money it is, I have to spend a lot of time justifying why I'm buying it and why that price is there. And so it's a big of a procedural process, but a lot of this stuff could have been automated and or standardized. So I
Okay.
started taking my PHP and my SQL knowledge and writing these little applications internally, but then also using the most popular server there is in enterprise, Excel, to
Yeah.
write other applications. So I was writing this for my team and showing people this and showing folks it, and then I got I actually started pitching software inside like a startup. So I started pitching these different approaches, like a little CRM system for procurement agents and all this kind of
Okay.
stuff. And they went so far as to give me my own job, saying, okay, you do procurement in one thing, but you build this little software. So I built out shadow IT organizations.
Okay.
That's a bit when I got into the cloud. So then at this point in time, I had this rudimentary MySQL PHP, and I actually had to learn how to write software well, because now I'm dealing with IT. And it actually, I had to learn how to write it after I raised $30,000 internally to write this piece of software. And like, go to IT, manage a project IT. So I went to IT, got it. And then I come to find out all my $30,000 was spent, but it was not on my project. Somebody used that line, the charge bucket to charge to some other project. And so that's when I was just like, F it. I'm going to go write my own software. And so that's where I started down. It was nights, weekends on YouTube and Pluralsight at that time was a guy by the name of Bucky. If you'll look him up, that's where I learned a lot of stuff. And then I was translating from VB script into C#. I just you started using this internal platform as a service called Prinda. Okay. Think about it as like an AWS or a Google inside, but it was really cool because you could just zip file all your software, put it up there, it patched it for you, and it scaled your environments up and down before containers were around. Or before containers are being used, as they're around for a while, but they're used today. So I was really going through and teaching myself and writing all this C#, and some of the software got some pretty big notoriety. We won some awards internally for prescriptive analytics software for lead time estimations of component parts. That was a big thing inside, like especially dealing like a Harrier, something may break on it that hasn't been like built for 50 years.
Right.
And so then the question is, how much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? And you can get to a very good heuristic of it, but it's a fairly complicated process. So how do you make it standardized for the organization? And that's where I was at. And like the workflow type of tools, the concepts is like, these are, everything's one-off because we are the exception to the norm, not the norm itself. But also, even in the exception area, you can still standardize and get to heuristics that works for many of those cases. So yes, that's what I started building, and then somewhere around then I got a bit of notoriety, got moved into a different organization, built out a shadow IT team. And I say shadow IT because at that point in time I was going around and I told myself, I was like, I have to learn how to write software better than their IT people. Okay. It's not that I need to be better than the IT people, like I want to leverage them, but I need to get in and I need to have a conversation with them that, number one, we can both understand, and number two, they can see me as either an equal and or a leader in this space.
Right.
And so pushed myself to write the software there, was doing it for Boeing. And then it was it December 31st, 2014, for my first business partner friend of mine at that time. Instead of Boeing, we just said, hey, let's go start a business. And so I came back on like January was the 5th or something, gave my 30-day notice, and ever since then it's taken off.
That was really interesting, the kind of journey into tech from like kind of being passionate about solving problems. But talk to me a bit more about your story about getting into architecture.
Yeah, so when I found out how much software architects made, I said, okay, I gotta be one of these, right? I can't just go in and put software architect on a piece of paper. Although I did. I mean, I got back in the industry after that to raise money, put software architect. And I spent a lot of time, again, on YouTube and Pluralsight, like what the hell does an architect do? And then I sort of realized at that point in time, software architecture is not really defined, and or it's one of those words, it's a trope to a degree, but it's one of those words that can mean anything you want it to mean, and nobody's gonna be like, yeah, that's a bad thing. It's always good. And so
it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think the building architects probably get really annoyed with the technology architects calling themselves architects. Because you think about, I mean, I had this conversation with someone else, but I think they have like 7 years, certainly they do in Europe anyway, like 7 years worth of study to get to call themselves an architect. And then, they've probably got, get a decent portfolio of work and all this sort of stuff. And like you and I kind of effectively, kind of have been able to kind of label ourselves an architect. People are going, oh yeah, we can see he can connect the business people with technology and create, effective systems designs and that sort of stuff, or kind of understand non-functionals and things, or however they describe it, and we can kind of become one. So it's interesting. And the conversations I have with ISA, like Paul Price, it's really interesting, like how do you professionalize the industry? Because I see value in people who've come through the kind of the route you've just described, the kind of the passionate hobbyist who then becomes professional. And then I've kind of come from the kind of classic computer science route, and then ironically did PHP MySQL as well, by the way. So I did my degree where I did Java and RBC and Corba and all this clever stuff, and then like got a job in a startup doing PHP MySQL development. But anyway, that's that. So that's that one. But no, I think there's just different angles into different directions into the profession. But how do you standardize it? Because the next question I was actually going to ask you is, where do you see the line between kind of tech engineer and tech architect? What for you is it kind of just a grey kind of sort of spectrum of roles, do you think, or are there kind of clear differences, do you think, between like an engineer and an architect when it comes to tech?
So let's go to architect first. This is interesting talking about building architects, right? I remember talking to one. He's like, "Oh, you're the fake architect." I'm like, "What do you mean by fake architect?" He's like, "You're not legally responsible for anything you do." And I was like, "Yes, I will be the fake architect every day as long as I'm not legally responsible for the shit I do." So like, as you think about that, it's just a really good point. It's like building architects and engineers. I get a house I'm redoing right now, and I got to pay which is funny because I think software architects make more than building architects, but there's a lot more building architects out there. But
it's a supply and demand thing, I guess, isn't it? Yeah,
exactly. And it's I mean, I don't know the art. I know enough about building that I can say the architecture is probably just as tough as a domain as software architecture. But probably a bit more concrete than abstract than what we're at. But anyways,
there's a dad joke in there somewhere, like concrete versus abstract. They work with a lot of concrete. But anyway, sorry. Carry on.
If there is not one, I'm going to create one.
Okay.
But no, engineering. So yeah, so like I think it's interesting architect. And like you think about it in software, I mean, it's really software engineering has been around since what? I mean, I think software engineering was first talked about in a conference in like the 60s, early 60s.
Yeah.
So just think about it. What is it? 220 right now? That's roughly 60 years. Oh wow, that is 60 years.
Scary, isn't it?
Yeah. As a domain, think about architecture, building architecture, the thousands of years history, and like the concept of an architecture comes from like the Latin word architecte, which means the master builder. So we are always borrowing terms from somebody else just because how new we are. Even though we're moving fast and pushing the world quickly, we're still very young, wet behind the ears, basically. So it gets down to like, you ask like good architect versus engineer. I think there's almost 3 levels.
Okay.
And I'll use some analogies. I think you have a developer, you have an engineer, and then you have an architect.
Okay.
Now, I wouldn't say they're positions. I would say they're roles. And an individual can be all 3. And they're not independent of each other. They're not mutually exclusive. But at the same point in time, you can have people that are architects that can't be software engineers and developers. And I want to talk to that a little bit because I'm starting to think that the architect is like I said, as a trope, it's becoming overused. Like somewhere about 3 or 4 years ago, it just became the word to use. And now everybody's a freaking architect. So and you go talk to these folks, like even when I was I was standing up my first enterprise architect organization, interviewing people for enterprise architecture. I called myself a backyard enterprise architect because I spent, again, Pluralsight and YouTube and like TOGAF, like learning all this stuff. And all I saw were technical people that just put enterprise architecture on there. Like they were just basically Java middleware engineers, scratch that out, put enterprise architect.
Yeah.
And so that was like my first foray into like, wow, this is like all architects are fake.
And I think some organizations have just promoted their really good tech talent into, and HR doesn't help with this sometimes. You have to kind of create these job profiles, don't you? And in order to kind of continue to give people more money, sometimes you have to kind of, I mean, I've certainly worked in places where there are people who are senior enterprise architects, but they are at best technology architect. Maybe I have, very experienced IT engineers or architects that are just very much into the one domain. I wouldn't call them enterprise architects. And I think that's where the industry doesn't do itself any favors, really, where we have to kind of shoehorn talented people, valuable people that we want to hang on to, so we want to pay them well, but we end up having to put them in a job role, or they end up giving themselves a job role that doesn't quite match what actually the role is about. So that for me, it doesn't help, is kind of trying to fit people into the right boxes as well, right?
Exactly. Well, and part of it too is like I don't think software architecture is a box you can fit people in.
That's fair.
It may be almost ambiguous as DevOps. Or Lean. But I'll go down to like my 3 examples, right? Now I want to compare them to someone like the automotive industry, and this is how I think about it and look at it. I think you're seeing a rise in developers. Those like spend 8 weeks, 12 weeks, and you can start writing software and that kind of stuff. I call them developers insofar as I compare them to mechanics.
Okay.
They know enough about how things operate in a car or maybe software, and sometimes they're platform specific. Maybe it's BMW, Toyota, Ford, Chevy. Like they're very platform specific. So somebody's like, I'm an Angular developer, I'm this. And so they basically know how to use a tool to achieve an outcome. Yep. The thing is, their thought process is not how to achieve it. They're told what to do, or they're told how to do it. They just go codify it. Right. So you have the developer, right? And a lot of people call them engineers or developers. So then you come into the engineer. I mean, that's where I started my career out, was like a bit of a developer. Then I had to go into being an engineer, and an engineer is, the true word of engineering is figuring out the solution to the problem, right? So you have some sliver of domain, some sliver of problem that you're like, okay, it's ambiguous. I need to figure out what the problem is to begin with. I need to figure out the solution for the problem, and I need to figure out how to deliver that solution. That's engineering. I think that's where, as you talk about you coming from a formal CIS background, that's where a lot of those are taught there, because most people, like, I started formal engineering. I just hated diff EQ, so I went to business because that was the easiest alternative. My whole idea was like, screw it, I can own engineers one day and make more money than being an engineer. And now I'm come full circle. I'm like, yeah, it's just dealing with a bunch of engineers. Sometimes I love them, but it's a pain in the butt. So I'm like, sometimes I could just make more money being one. Like, and there's something to say from the creative aspect. Like, if you can create in today's any society, if you can create, if you're just a business, you're administering other people's creations. Or if you can create and you can do business, then you can create what's not there and administer it, and your value is a lot more.
Yeah,
in my experience. But anyway, so that's where that software engineer comes in, right? And then you get to the architect. And the architect's an interesting one, because software architecture in general, is closely related to software engineering. But I would go upwards and saying, like, your software engineer is the person that maybe designs the car, right? Designs that model, designs a car, designs a system on it. But now your software architect is analogous to sort of that systems engineer who looks at the plant that's got to build these cars. And they're looking broader, and it's not just how are the cars built, but what are the business results we got to get out of there. And working with people in product and marketing and across the business and finance, because they have a economic aspect to what they're doing in addition to their technical aspect, as well as a soft skills and like a human aspect, right? So not are they just trying to figure out how to make this homogeneously come together, but also they're trying to work with other people and to lead either from behind or in front. They're
it's the consulting skill set as well. I think a good architect is a good consultant. Great to talk to you, Bill, and have a great rest of your day, and take care.
You too. Thank you very much.
Great stuff.
See ya.